So welcome everybody to this evening's inaugural professorial event. We normally call these inaugural professorial lectures, but as you'll see from your programme, this evening is a bit more exciting than that. So it really gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you here this evening to hear Bob Cohan, Professor Bob Cohan, present this inaugural evening.
Thank you very much for the introductions. I'm more than a little nervous doing this in this context, so I asked Professor Bannerman to join me because we've known each other for 41 years, and he always asks sort of difficult questions. And I tend to rabble on about things because, after all, 90 years is an old age, and you tend to not know when to stop. So, but I'm going to start with something that I think is pertinent, although half the people here know it very well. I was born in a very suburban area of Brooklyn in 1925. It was not the Brooklyn that you know from the films or books or whatever. Where I was in a community that was mixed up equal parts with Jewish, Irish, and Italian. And we all lived as one simple community because right on the edge of our streets were farms, inlets for the water. Brooklyn is on the water. It's on a bay, and I spent my whole youth searching these marshes for clams, crabs, fishing. I lived a totally different life than the one that I ended up in. Dance became a part of that life because my mother took me to school, a dance school, when I was about 4 or 5 years old. That went on for a while, and then there was always a little main street somewhere, as there is now in every town, and there was always a dance studio in those streets. And I was enrolled. I did 20 minutes of tap every Saturday, 20 minutes of gymnastics, and 20 minutes of adagio. I didn't know what adagio was, but it was the Brooklyn name for ballet. But more importantly than that, so dance became a part of my life, that's what I'm saying. But even more importantly than that, every Saturday afternoon, every child that I knew and myself, we all went to the movies. And we were at the end of the movie chains. The big chains were in the city, and then the little suburban theaters as it went further out. And for 10 cents, we could go in and see these movies on a Saturday afternoon. It went on forever because you had a serial, a cartoon, advertising, then you had at least one Western or criminal film, but then you always had a musical. And this was the years of Busby Berkeley, great big spectacles, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, but even before Ginger Rogers, he had other partners, Ann Miller and Ruby Keeler. And that was the way I thought the world was. I thought no matter what your problems were, you got together, and at the end of it, you made a show, and you all danced, and you were very happy. And I know it sounds simple-minded, but I really believed it. And dance was very simple for me. It was a part of my life, that kind of dance. Also, as we got older, well, even in those early years, every time we saw a Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire movie, we'd come back, my sister and I would roll up the carpet in the living room and try to repeat every step we saw. It was an easy way of living, and movement and dance was a part of it. All this was sort of unconscious to me in the sense that I thought everybody did what I did. When I got into high school, 12, 13, I immediately joined the fencing team, and running team, jumping. They didn't have gymnastics. Yes, I did a little bit of that. But then I got right into the cheerleading. Cheerleading is, in New York, the high schools are very serious as basketball players, football players, and American football, and baseball. And I performed, I performed. They play games at these big stadiums, like Yankee Stadium, Madison Square Garden, names you might have heard. And as a member of the cheering squad, I did gymnastics in all those places. So I thought it was quite normal to perform for thousands of people. It was the way life was. When I got into the Army in 1943, I was stationed on the West Coast, California, with a group of men. We were in a program of very special training. We never knew what we were being trained for. But these men were from a different class of society than I was. They were all educated in a different way and mostly cultured in a different way. I didn't know about classical music. I didn't know about ballet. I didn't know about Shakespeare, really. I didn't know about drama. And it was a period of intense discovery for me. They actually took me because I said, ballet, what's that? They took me to see American Ballet Theater. And suddenly, I saw people on the stage doing what I thought was normal. It was an amazing revelation. And it really was a confusing change in my life because I didn't know people did that. When I was stationed in Warminster just before we went to France. And I used to come into London to see the then Sadler's Wells Ballet before it became the Royal Ballet, and quite enjoyed that. Suddenly, I saw one piece called Miracle in the Gorbals. It was recently revived for Birmingham Royal Ballet. And in this dance, I understood that you could say serious things in dance. And that got me even more excited. When I got back to New York after the war, I was showing a girlfriend around New York. She had come from California to study with Martha Graham. And not knowing, of course, who Martha Graham was, she kept saying that I had to go there and study because that was what I wanted. And she was absolutely right. I went into the studio, and it was like everything I did in my life before, the classes, the tap, the adagio, watching the dance, doing the athletics, everything came to that moment when I had a revelation. I knew that this was a way of moving and using my body that I would do for the rest of my life. I mean, I was very lucky. I found it out at once. And when I think back now about all of that young experience, I think it was completely natural to me. And I even come to the idea that we are hardwired, not maybe all of us, but some of us, we are hardwired to dance. And that it's there in us right from birth. And eventually, if you're lucky, it all comes together and you find it. That's my starting point. So I think when people say that they can dance, it's not that they aren't hardwired inside. It's just that they've never used it. They've never found a reason to use it.
But of course that brings us to the point of thinking that if people are hardwired, or those people who are hardwired, then what is the purpose, the point, the role of the dance teacher? And are there people who arrive with their hardwiring disrupted, as you wrote in the synopsis?
But if you think of the hardwiring as an algorithm, any at any point along the way, if you change some of the numbers or letters or part of the system, you disrupt the algorithm. It no longer works. So you say to a child, stop jumping. You're irritating me. Stop that. Stop that. When Dad comes home, don't you dare do that. You tell the child who's fidgeting around, sit still, don't do that. A child who's running in the street, watch out, you're going to get hurt, and so forth. And this is interrupting, as I see it, just a tiny little bit of interrupting that algorithm. It isn't, one of our problems, all of us, is that we're born too early. We're born too young. Animals, and some of us stay that way. No, we're born when we, you know that with most mammals, a deer or a giraffe or whatever, they fall out of their mother, and within half an hour they're standing, and within 3 or 4 hours they're running. They have to survive. And our babies can't even roll over. They can do nothing when they're born. So the hardwiring doesn't have a chance. We were talking before, among other things, I raised snakes when I was a kid. My mother would suffer, but I had snakes in my bedroom. And they frequently gave birth. Some snakes lay eggs, and some snakes give birth to live young. And when the little baby comes out, he's wrapped up like that, like a shoelace, with a little red vein around him. And he just falls there like a little package, and then starts wiggling, and immediately breaks the little package open, and then is a proper snake. He's immediately doing this. Well, where did he learn to do that? Where did he learn to run away and catch his? So that's the area that I think we're hardwired in.
But then you, as a dance teacher, and of course, perhaps we haven't said enough about the role of you as a dance teacher and the contribution you made and the system you've set down, but your role as a dance teacher in engaging with this, or what is that system, what is that process through which you engage with a student to lead them somewhere?
Well, yes, I think you have to start even further. Why is the student there? Why have they come? Is it some students we know, in dance especially, they have a passion. They've seen dance, which is exactly what happened to me. I saw the ballet, and I immediately knew that was me inside. Art is like that. I think art breeds art. Therefore, you have to see art to become an artist. You can do other things, but suddenly when you hear music, you think, wow, I really hear that. I can do that. I can be there. You read something in a poem, and it is, I would like to write that. Something identifies within you with what you're watching, what you're seeing. The same thing with dance. Some people see dance. A student gets involved, dreams of it, and sort of comes as a student. Others come there because their mothers told them to. Others come because they're curious. Everybody comes at a different level to it, but here, as a teacher, you're presented with all of these people. Now, my premise is that some of them, because they were stopped from developing when they were children, are disabled. And that's a difficult thing to admit and difficult thing to solve. When, if you have a disability with a leg or an arm or your back, we see it, but we don't see this disability. So the problem is when the student comes in front of you, identifying that there could be a neurological disability. And that's a different way of thinking about your students than we normally do.
I begin to understand why I struggled so much with dance training, but it seemed to me that somehow the attention was being focused and channeled through the body, both using a very analytical language and a very image-based language, and that somehow you were bringing these things together in a way that I hadn't ever experienced.
The problem you have is in where your attention is as a student and where the teacher's attention is as a teacher. Why, when your students are in front of you, you cannot assume that they don't want to do what you're teaching. You have to assume that everybody there wants to do it. Once you reach that point, the responsibility is on the teacher to open those channels in the student so that they can appreciate what you have to teach. The problem is in the very words themselves. I don't go to teach. I go for the students to learn. So they have to come to a point where they are teaching themselves, and I am leading the teaching. But doesn't mean I don't say a lot. I do, but I have to reach their attention to the point where they are voluntarily learning, and that I think is very important, because it's no longer. It is the responsibility of the teacher to create that, but it is the responsibility of the student to use what the teacher has given them, the opening that the teacher has given.
And of course, perhaps you had a long interest in the kind of psychology, the psychological aspects. I remember you saying once you were very interested in Gurdjieff when you were in those New York days, and it wasn't just the matter of the mechanics. Your degree, I think, was in biology.
Well, I tried to teach, when I teach dance, I tried to teach mechanical structure, mechanical architecture, because I assume that behind there, if you want to be a dancer, there is an aesthetic. I assume that. The problem is that the aesthetic has to come through the body. Your aesthetic has to come through your body. Therefore, the body has to become a tool that you use to expose the aesthetic that's in you. Without the mechanical structure being absolutely perfect in the body, and we have evolved an absolutely splendid structure. It may be a little weird to other animals who are on 4 legs, but we have evolved how to work on 2 legs, how to fly into the air, how to jump, how to curve, how to twist. We have a spine that rotates in a totally different way from most mammals, and we have literally just about any kind of movement we can do. We can't do a full rotation of our heads yet, but soon. Now, in actual fact, we have a fantastic structure. The problem that I see is that early on, that structure is slightly deformed, or deformed is a bad word. I don't know what other word to use. I don't mean that it's totally out of shape, but it can be lopsided. It can be just like if you live on a hill, one leg has to be longer than the other all the time, and so that's a joke.
Quite a good analogy, actually.
No, but actually you get into a way of moving, either from your culture. One day I was in front of Euston Station where there's a great big open area, and in the summer I was watching some children playing, and there were 3 or 4 of them. They were running around, and I noticed that one boy could run very well, and about the same age there was a girl who could almost keep up with him, and there was another girl who couldn't run at all. So I looked at her, because when you're a choreographer, that's your library. You look at people all the time. You want to see every movement they're making, because that's usable, that's your library. Just watching people, sometimes I used to just watch people. I lean against a building on Regent Street and just watch people walk, because it's absolutely fascinating what's happening. And this one girl, there was nothing wrong with her, but she couldn't run. And it baffled me as to why she couldn't run. And I think the answer, I mean, I don't know the answer. I think it could be very simple. She never ran. She was never in a space like that where she could actually run. She was 5, 6, 7. And we all know that when you go to any supermarket with a young child, or a good one is the airport, because I traveled a lot. The airport, the kids run immediately, big open space. They just fly across it. And if you're brought up in a single room, a living room and a bedroom, and maybe you have 4 or 5 siblings, and it's crowded with furniture, you don't run. And unless you get out in the street, and you know, we tell people, don't go on the street alone, and we tell kids not to do that now. And we're inhibiting all of that structure and the ability. Here's another problem. If you don't use the nerves, as we know, anybody who's had a cast on their leg, if you don't use those nerves, they begin to shrivel up. They begin to deteriorate. And nerves regrow all the time. So you can get all the nerves back. But if you don't use the nervous system to run, literally, the body starts to forget how to do it because the neurons and the nervous system is not activated. And that's what I think happened to that girl. Now, when you're teaching a class, you have an assortment in front of you of students who run the whole gamut, from not being able to run to somebody who you know is going to be a dancer. And this is the teacher's problem, how to bring them all into some kind of understanding and teach them all how to learn so that they can do it. And the reason I'm talking this way is we're talking about dance, which is a physical exercise. In some senses, you have to be an athlete to be a dancer. Even if you're not going to jump, you don't have to lift your leg very high. There are kinds of dance that you can do like that, where it's more about the sensation and the working inside of the muscles, in which you don't have to do pyrotechnic tricks like pirouettes and high jumps. But even then, I keep coming to this analogy of a violin because it's so simple. Violinists plays a violin which they have bought or been given. If they have a bad violin, they will play okay, but the sound will not be good. When they get a better violin, they can play better and sounds better. When they get a really good violin that is much better than they can use, they're challenged to come up to that standard themselves. So they learn more if they have a good instrument. Well, a dancer has to make their violin. They have to make their body. The body that you have when you come into it is not, it's fine for what we do, for eating, sleeping, and going around and picking things up, but it's not going to work if you have an extraordinary idea that you want to express through your body.
Shall we see an example?
We're going to show you a dance that I choreographed, I always forget when, 1978, let's assume, 77 to 78. And it was a dance I choreographed for a soloist, a woman, Susan McPherson, who came from Canada. And it was a strange idea because I didn't know what I was going to do. And Jeffrey Bergen, a very good contemporary composer, who I worked with a lot, he talked to me one day and I said, I need this music. He said, I've got something that I think you will like. and he handed me a little CD, well, actually, a cassette, a long time ago. And it was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful construction of two alto singers, two men, singing words from St. John of the Cross poems. And I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful way to go. So I didn't use the poems literally, but I used them in a quality way, which is what dance, I think, does very well. Dance doesn't tell you a narrative too well. They can tell you he loves her or he doesn't like him or whatever, but it doesn't. It does do very well when it talks about inner quality, inner sensation, things that a choreographer cannot put into words. A poet might be able to do it, musicians can certainly do it, but it's a kind of inner language that comes out through your body. And this is what the dance is about.
Thank you.
So, I think we saw the highly skilled body of knowledge, honed, expert, a dancer engaged, communicating. We only spoke about that previously in relation to the dance training, the training of the dancer in the class. We've now moved into the performance arena. And of course your teaching was most often, from my experience, attached to a professional context in which people were going to perform for an audience. What's that about?
Okay, you asked me before about Gurdjieff. I don't usually like to talk about it because he was a mystic who had a very large group, a large following, all through the First World War up to, I think he died in 1946. And he worked in Russia, France, England, and the United States. It was called the Gurdjieff Group. And I did belong to it for a while. His premise was very simple. He came from Sufi training, and that is about, I'm not going to pretend I can sum it up in any way whatsoever, but what it was about mainly, or at least in part, what touched me mainly about it was this idea of knowing who you are, remembering yourself. Now, since then, it has become a very popular, I mean, we have billboards, especially in France, that say Zen, and they're advertising a TV. It's also in here, and especially in New York right now, everybody's talking about being mindful. Mm-hmm. Mindful, what does that mean? That you are mindful of what? You're mindful of a lot of things. You know, I put my telephone down mindfully as much as I can because I don't want to break it. What about yourself? Do you handle yourself mindfully? Because it's also fragile. And it comes very clear when you come to dance because the entire, as an art form, the entire body, physical body, is involved, and of course, it's being run by this entire hardwired nervous system that we have inside of it. And it is a very fragile, delicate system to run, but you can control it very carefully by your concentration, by your attention. You certainly can't do magic with it, but you can create a spell like Yolanda was able to create just now by your intensity and personal mindfulness while you're doing it. Now, go back to class. For me, that's what a class was all about when I studied, for me, as a student. I had to be mindful of my body. I had to be sure that it was learning what the teacher was trying to tell me to do or demonstrating. I had to be mindful of my bones. I had to be mindful of my skin. I had to be mindful of my head inside, what it was, where the focus was. You cannot do a dance class. You cannot practice a movement and think about what you're going to have for dinner. I mean, it's absurd because what you're working for is the control of the muscles themselves, and it takes your full attention to be there. So this practice, this performance skill, for me, starts in the class because you're putting the attention, and with the intention, you're putting awareness. With the attention, you're putting a kind of energy of life into your body, into your muscles. And that's why a dancer's body should change. It should not be the body that the student came in with at the beginning of the study period. After several years, it should be different. It should be a more sensitive, aware, I'm not talking about being skinny and well-proportioned. I'm talking about inside the body, how you're aware, how you know where you are and what you're doing.
So we achieved that in class, and we hope we achieved it. And then suddenly, you take us into a different place. I look at the mirror, and there's actually people there. There's no mirror, there are people looking at me.
That's
and
right.
There's lights shining in my eyes. How do we create that solidity of practice, that solidity of the mindful approach that can take us and sustain us?
When you're, there's a very simple way of doing it, but it is not easy. When you're in the classroom, you're attending to yourself in the studio. You're attending to yourself, you're listening to the teacher, you're trying to practice this perfection, you're being mindful, but you're doing it in an abstract, mechanical way. You're not necessarily thinking about the aesthetic at that point. You have to be able to separate yourself into two parts. One part is you're saving for the performance in front of an audience. The other part you're doing for your body, for your skills. There's that craft involved. In any art form, the craft is there. The craft supports it. The craft is underneath it. But then, when you get into a choreography and you start the rehearsal, you begin to come in touch with the meaning of the movement. Not that you can put it into words, but you can know that when you look a certain way, when you do a certain thing, a movement is going to have a significance, it's going to have a movement. And then you begin to practice that. But it has the same attention that you had on the body. The slightly other element is that the audience, in actual fact, gives you a response. It gives you a magnetic, at least I find so. The audience gives you an energy that you can use, because what you really want to do is not be a little secret here on the stage. What you really want to do is share what you've got with the audience. You want to speak to them, but you want to speak to them from you. So you want the audience to come to you and go back. Does that sound too mysterious?
I think those who have experienced it will feel that it's a real thing that they can engage with. But you then went on at a certain point to talk about a period in your performing career when actually somehow you were engaged but disengaged, that there was a sense of harmony.
Yes. Yes. I saw a little child actually this morning. She was sitting on her mother's knee, and she heard something exciting. And when she heard it, she immediately, arms and legs all went like that. It was instantaneous. She didn't think about it. She didn't think I'm excited. I should move my arms and legs. Yeah. It happened to her. There's a moment that we all experience when we knock something over and we catch it, actually. Well, intellectually, we wouldn't be able to, normally we wouldn't move that fast. We wouldn't be able to catch it, but that time we did. Who moved you? Who did it? Why were you able to catch it? When you step off a curb and a bus is coming, your body pulls you back. What I think is happening is that another part of you, it is you, is taking over away from the intellectual side, away from the logical side, and reacting positively to the current situation, to the moment of truth at that moment. And that's what dance does and is, and that's the way you should perform. You should perform the now. I've read just a few months ago that scientists have decided that now lasts between 2.5 and 3 seconds. And it might be true. Some of us, it might last about an hour. Because by the time you register the now, it's got to be at least 2 seconds. But dance, if dance is anything, it is a constant sequences of now. So you are there in a continuous form of energy going on. Now, if you trust yourself, if you trust that that will happen, and that can happen, and if your tool is well enough defined, well enough crafted, and if you're well enough inside yourself, inside the position of the dance, the essence, the smell of the dance, it actually can happen the same way that you caught the glass or you step away from the bus. It can happen, and you can almost watch it unfolding. So you can have that beautiful experience that I think you're talking about, where you are doing the right thing at the right time and in the right place.
Of course, you've had decades to think these things through in a very deep way, and continually engaged somehow, it seems to me.
But they're experiential. They are not abstract thought. They are what you experience.
Is there a period of, your ability to communicate these things seems to come from some deep reflection on them, some awareness and some reflection?
I don't see it as reflection. I think of it as getting out of the way. If you are constantly, when we talk about control, what does that mean? Who's at the controls? I don't think we're at the controls really very much at all. I think we're more like a ping pong ball, which will not move unless it's hit. And we react to our lives more like that. Now, a dancer cannot do that because they may as well be on YouTube, not on the stage, because they are just a series of images, like hieroglyphics, but they have no meaning. I think that you can achieve that if you, as I said again, if you know everything you're doing and you give it over to, let me put it another way, you are who you think you are. We know that. And in any moment, you have to be who you are at that moment. So why not give it over to the one who can do it?
And do these things, remarkably, you're still choreographing, these things informing your work?
Yes, of course. The dance we're going to see with Liam, I had an idea. It's a good example. I had an idea that I was going to do a dance this was for a birthday party that I had the last Friday and Thursday and Friday.
The 90th birthday party.
My 90th,
Should I say
yes.
that?
So I thought I would do something very clever. I would put together material from all of my dance experience for 70 years about. I would put together movements that I liked all the way through, as much as I could remember, and just do them all as one dance on somebody else, not me. And I got into the studio with Liam, and I also trashed the music that I was going to use.
Oh dear.
Richard Alston, I told Richard, who was helping me, I said, this is what I'd like to use, but I can't use it, and so forth. And he said, have you ever heard the Zelgarthos theory? I said, no. And he found it, put the CD, actually put YouTube on. And I heard the first 30, not even 30 seconds. I said, it's perfect. That's it. I knew that was the right music. I just asked him, where's the climax? He said about 2.5 minutes in, and then it continues. I said, fine. and I just started. I hadn't even heard the whole piece of music yet, because I wasn't making the choice. When I heard the music, I knew that I could choreograph that from the first sound. And the moment I told Liam what to do at the beginning, I knew the whole dance. It was all there. All I had to do was stay out of the way. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Shall we see it? And
Yes. This is called Suspiria's Sigh, and that's what it is.